Welcome back. Now, today, the South African media industry is commemorating the 46th anniversary of National Press Freedom Day, also marked as Black Wednesday in the history of South Africa. Now, on Wednesday, the 19th of October, 1977, the apartheid government banned independent media and took journalists into detention in an attempt to silence the media from reporting on the murder of Black consciousness leader Steve Biko and other brutal acts of the apartheid regime. Now, as we reflect on this day, SABC News and Current Affairs Group Executive Moshoeshoe Monare and Director of Media Monitoring Africa, William Bird, join me now here in studio to discuss how far the media industry has come and, of course, the extent of the power place between media control and media freedom in South Africa today. Gentlemen, thanks so much for coming through. Welcome to Morning Live.
Good morning. Good morning. Thanks very much.
You know, as I was thinking about this yesterday, Moshoeshoe, if I could start with you, I am one of the people who believe in the maxim that if you don't know your history, you are bound to repeat it sooner rather than later. And in the context of a Black Wednesday and media freedom, taking for granted these civil liberties that were so hard fought for, it is perhaps worth reflecting once again on how we got to where we are and the price that was paid for the freedom that we enjoy.
Look, I agree, because if we forget about it, the biggest mistake that we'll make is not to realize the essence of the role of the media, the critical role of the media in a democracy. I mean, for our democracy to flourish is based on an independent judiciary and a fiercely independent media. And my worry is that, look, on the positive, we don't have editors being arrested like we saw with Percy Qoboza. We don't have editors being harassed by the police and being told what to write. That's the positive, that journalists can write what they like. But on the negative is that the decline in the media for commercial and other reasons, be it SABC, our colleagues at print media, the decline in circulation, the decline in investment in the newsroom also means that freedom, we are taking it for granted. That freedom is under threat. And also we need to remind ourselves that the essence of Section 16 of the Constitution is also under threat. I mean, you might have heard some of your viewers talking about the right to receive information. That's critical. It's not about our jobs as journalists, but it's about ordinary men and women's right to receive information, to express themselves, to be able, like we've got elections coming, to be able to choose the government of their choosing based on the information that they have. Because without that information, actually, we cannot confidently talk about democracy.
And William, Moshoeshoe touches on, the funding aspect of things, and whether we like it or not, that is a crucial aspect of the work that journalists are able to deliver in the contemporary context. But speaking to that, if you look at, for example, an institution like the SABC and what the SABC is going through, would you say those constraints are by design or by default at the moment?
Our democratic history has been really interesting, because you've seen clear efforts where ministers successively sought to interfere directly in the affairs of the SABC. We've seen the hazards that's causing Eskom and other enterprises. After a court case taken by SOS and MMA and FXI, we managed to get the SABC board independent. Until then, you'd seen all of these efforts to interfere directly, and that was the way of asserting political dominance. We saw a strong backlash, 2016 under Hladi Motsoeneng, the SABC 8, the staff that continued under incredible circumstances and fought back against those particular incursions. Now what you're seeing is that because the SABC functions as an independent public broadcaster, the new approach is to say, fine, what we're going to do is we're going to not give you any money. We're going to just actively defund the SABC. So this crisis that the SABC is facing, a financial crisis, which may, touch wood, we hope never goes to black, is something that is actively being allowed by government. You can't say they're doing it without any knowledge when they know that this has been coming. They say the SABC is a big public mandate, yet they're not prepared to fund that. Instead, they always then carve it out as, okay, here's a bailout because you don't know what you're doing or you're incompetent or whatever. Nonsense. SABC is there to give news and information to the majority of people in South Africa. We're seeing with AI and with the explosion of disinformation that one of the most critical things you need for democracy to survive is an independent, credible public broadcaster without the SABC. So what are those who don't like that want to do? The only way you can destroy the SABC now, you defund it.
And these are, of course, critical matters, Moshoeshoe.
Yeah, look, just to support William's point is that the unfortunate part is that the majority of South Africans, men and women in rural KZN, rural Eastern Cape, rural Limpopo, depend on SABC News for their information. I mean, it shows in our audience. I mean, these are the people who will not sacrifice their last money to subscribe to Media 24 or the Sunday Times, because if you're going to do that, then you are excluding the majority of South Africans who their source of news actually is a public broadcaster. And there's a reason why we call it a public broadcaster and not a state broadcaster, because the accountability, the people that are critical, who are at the center of what we do every day, is those ordinary men and women. You know, unlike a commercial broadcaster, we don't have a luxury to say, you know, this is you know, a luxury that we need to. But the mandate is to make sure that whatever we put in our radio, whatever we put on our TV, is for those people. And if there's going to be no investment in SABC, we need to remember that it's not about Moshoeshoe Monare, it's not about SABC management, it's about the implication on those people. And like, I want to repeat that the Section 16 of the Constitution is very clear on our obligations towards those people.
And speaking of those obligations, you know, a case in point right now that doesn't necessarily speak to the news in terms of hard news per se, but looking at what's happening with sports rights and the right of the South African public to actually view their national teams when they play. This is a big deal. And this is one that the media cannot be silent on. And this is one where, again, one is reminded that this is no longer a state broadcaster, but a public broadcaster that acts in the interest of the South African public, where the man sleeping under the bridge who doesn't have 2 cents to rub together has a stake in this entity. And when we cannot bring, you know, these events to South Africans, and people complain every day, Moshoeshoe, William, I can show you messages where people are crying, saying to me, but Sakina, how is it that we're paying our TV licenses, but we can't watch, you know, the Springboks play? We can't watch the Proteas play. Bafana were playing last night. Most people didn't even know that the national team was playing. These are some of the issues that actually matter right now.
Actually, it's not even about paying the license. It's after 1994, the SABC foundation was premised on the principle of universal access. And that universal access is that nobody must be excluded on the basis that you cannot afford cable or subscription TV or subscription media. And my worry is that if there's no investment, if there is no, we are just excluding the majority, and it negates that principle of why we are a public broadcaster, because this is the institution that every South African, whether you're poor or rich, they need to really be proud and take ownership of. And that's one thing that we must not forget. And we'll be betraying those people who really suffered a lot for us to be able to speak here today and you know, this day.
Hence, we need to speak out on their behalf about how this is actually harming the nation, you know, depriving the nation of things that they ought to have a right to. But also, William, you touched on the issue of artificial intelligence, you know, in the contemporary context. You talk about things like misinformation, disinformation campaigns, propaganda, because of the fact that you now have so many platforms that are not regulated, where people are able to get into and disseminate news. But what does that mean for institutions that are still regulated?
Well, I mean, you need the SABC to be regulated, and I don't think anyone's suggesting it shouldn't be. But one of the things you need the SABC for is precisely to be able to put out credible, accurate, reliable information. There was a post going around of the president speaking that he had tried to get hold of President Macron to, commiserate over their loss to the, it was fairly light-hearted, but it was a fake video in essence, right? So you've got something, but to all intents and purposes, there was the president speaking. It was definitely his voice, not a robot. So the nature of AI is changing so fast that any day now, literally, you'll have videos that are so good that you will not know whether or not they're real, which means that the only way you're going to know if something is real or not, or credible or accurate, is to go to an actual credible, real, existing media that has standards, that is regulated, that adheres to ethical principles of journalism. And that means you're going to go where? To the public broadcaster and to other credible media. You need all of this in order to survive this onslaught of disinformation that's just is overwhelming. And you can see that just if you look at the conflict in the Middle East. There's so much stuff going on. Much of what you see, you simply don't know whether to believe it or not. So what do? You go again to your credible broadcasters. So there are so many aspects to media freedom, and we're being a little bit negative, I guess, on that element of it, but there's so much to actually celebrate around media freedom, the importance of it, our young people, their relation to it, them fighting for their rights. It's not like they're just these passive things that just sit there, So I think there's a lot of reason to be optimistic about our future for media freedom in South Africa.
Moshoeshoe?
Yeah. Look, the issue of misinformation and disinformation, or what others call malinformation, it's very critical, especially going towards the elections, because from SABC point of view, the internal mechanism, mechanism we use as quality assurance are there, but you need a lot of investment in order to counter very powerful AI and other, technologies that they use for misinformation. And it's one of those things that spend sleepless nights in terms of making sure that our quality assurance mechanism internally very strong against these powerful tools, because we've got that responsibility to cover elections in a fair, impartial, balanced, independent manner. And like William is saying, that you have a situation where people, when they read something that are not quite sure, they would say, if it doesn't appear the SABC, it's not quite right. But if our mechanisms are not strong, then we are also losing that credibility, which is really crucial.
I'm going to ask the two of you to just sit tight for me for 5 minutes. There's just something I want to run over as this pertains to not just South Africa, but, there's a broader context to press freedom and what we're talking about. But Moshoeshoe Monare and William Bird, they're just going to stay with us for 5 more minutes. We're going to take news at 8, and then we'll come back to this discussion shortly. Well, thanks so much, Leanne, and we're grateful to our guests for staying with us. We'll just steal 5 more minutes just to have another look at the broader situation worldwide around World Press Freedom, and this day being commemorated, of course, also known as Black Wednesday here in South Africa because of the atrocities committed by the apartheid regime. And we are just going to take a quick look with Moshoeshoe Monare, SABC's News and Current Affairs Group Executive, and William Bird, who's the Director of Media Monitoring Africa, as we discuss the extent of media freedom in South Africa and, of course, in the world. Thanks so much for your time, gentlemen. I just wanted us to, take a look at what's happening the world over as far as press freedom is concerned. So we're going to zoom into some of the slides, and the source for these, of course, is World Press Freedom Index and Reporters Without Borders. So this is the situation in the world in 2023, and the green that matches William's glasses, that indicates a good situation. As you can see, just a little smattering there in some of the what do you call them, Scandinavian countries. Yep. And then Asia, brown, very serious situation for the most part there. Noticeable problems is the orange parts, and satisfactory situation where we are, the yellow in South Africa. But I suppose, before I get your comments, very noticeable is that in the Americas, there is no green. So that good situation totally evaporated in the Americas. altogether. But your thoughts on this, given that the highest ranked countries, Norway, Ireland and Denmark, and Ireland I think is up 13 places. It's a noticeable one because it's the first time that you have a non-Scandinavian country creeping up there into the top. And also the lowest ranked ones, Vietnam, China and North Korea. Your comments, gentlemen?
Look, from a South African point of view, I would say it's a fairly good story to tell because our situation is satisfactory. Like when I started at the beginning to say, on a positive note, there's no South African journalist who will say is facing jail term or has been killed for writing or reporting. But the worrying thing is just on the continent, there are still worrying situations in which the voices of reporters are suppressed. And like I said, it's not even about the reporter's profession and their careers. It's about suppressing information, which must really be worrying. In South Africa, I must say, the only worry is the safety of journalists, especially reporting on some conflicts, which it's more about us also working closely with the community, making sure that the community understand our role, that actually we are acting in their best interest, so that when they see our journalists in turmoil situation, they understand that these are messengers who are actually taking on their messages across, and they should not be attacked. That, to me, that was my worry.
So, I mean, I think for South Africa, as Moshoeshoe said, it's broadly a really good story. We are number 2 on the continent. Namibia is just one place ahead of us. Namibia is the best on the continent in terms of press freedom. And these are really important indicators because you can see that at the bottom of Africa, there's that yellow part where, we really are holding on to these critical values, which, as Moshoeshoe has pointed out, are still under profound threat. When your public broadcasters facing extinction because of active defunding by government, that poses a fundamental threat to media freedom in South Africa. So it's no longer that kind of overt thing of the state, or indeed in that previous graph where you saw journalists disappearing from Mexico, where we know that one of the reasons there is because there's significant action either by the drug cartels or linked to state action, or similarly in India, where you've got a democracy for all intents and purposes, and yet there's active efforts to attack and undermine journalism. In South Africa, it's not coming from the laws necessarily, but it is coming from other things. The fact that Leanne, the moment you go on social media, you get attacked, you get trolled, or people target you for scamming, phishing scams and those sorts of things. And that undermines credibility. And what does that do? Undermines people's right to know what's real and what's rubbish. And what does that do? It undermines democracy.
And just to wrap it up, the point you were making, Moshoeshoe, just taking a global look at where journalists disappear, because this is a very worrying picture. So 165 media workers have disappeared since 2000. And if we look at the picture at the moment, in Syria, 33 journalists disappeared, Mexico 27, Pakistan 18, and in Yemen 11. And this, of course, very worrying because this is not even about journalists who were killed, but those who simply disappeared between 2000 and 2023. Shows the perils of this profession as well.
Yeah. Look, like I said, the biggest problem that you have is where the effort to throttle democracy is based on the first targets are journalists and the judiciary. Yeah. And that's where you see the disappearance, the jailing, the killing of journalists. That it's not about journalism, it's about the perils of a successful democracy. And to me, that's a worry that anywhere, that is why even now SABC and MMA are commemorating through media freedom festivals to say, understand because sometimes when we are operating in a free environment, we forget that actually we should not take it for granted.
William, talk to us about that collaboration.
So again, it is about highlighting the diverse elements of media freedom, and it's unpacking those through a festival to celebrate media freedom, because we do have an enormous amount to celebrate and protect. So we're looking at how children engage with news. We're looking at understanding AI and its impact on journalism. We're looking at things, efforts to prevent and mitigate online harms in the run-up to the 2024 elections. We're looking at hate speech, and we're having a game around hate speech to help people see that while you may say, oh yes, I understand that this is hate speech, it's very much areas of grey. And then we're ending with another game type experience, looking at whistleblowing and what that means, because of course had it not been for whistleblowers in South Africa, many of the most egregious things we would not simply know about, state capture being one of them, and Kandla being one of the earlier ones.
And that is so important. But gentlemen, we have to leave it there. Thanks so much for stopping by this morning. Moshoeshoe Monare, SABC News and Current Affairs Group Executive, and William Bird, Director of Media Monitoring Africa, discussing the extent of media freedom in South Africa. And this, of course, as the country reflects on 46 years after Black Wednesday, how far we've come and, of course, how far we still have to go.